Story 1. The elevator kept going to the basement, but we didn't have one. This happened to me in 2019 during the graveyard shift at an office complex in downtown Chicago. I was hired as an overnight building manager for a newly retrofitted mixed-use property that housed small law firms, accounting offices, and a few upscale consulting agencies. The building was modern, maybe 7 years old, outfitted with security systems, fire suppression, smart lighting, everything a high-end client would expect. The shift was solitary. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., it was just me, 2 elevators, and 6 stories of mostly empty space. I liked the quiet at first. The building had a stillness to it that made my job easy, the kind of silence where you could hear your own breath bounce softly off the glass panels and carpeted corridors. At night, the automatic lights only turned on when motion was detected, so you could walk down the hallway and watch each section illuminate like a path revealing itself. The first time I noticed something wrong with the elevator, I was on the 3rd floor doing my rounds. I had just checked the fire doors and was waiting for the elevator to take me back down. The doors opened. It was empty, as expected. I pressed L for lobby, leaned against the rail, and closed my eyes briefly. But instead of going up or down, it just didn't move. Then the doors opened again. I looked up and blinked. Instead of the 3rd floor, the panel above the door just read 1. I stared at it for a long second. There was no sub-level in this building. I knew that for a fact. I had memorized the blueprints during onboarding. The elevators only serviced 6 floors. There was no basement, no underground parking, nothing below the lobby. And yet, there it was. 1. I didn't step out. The lights outside the elevator were off. No ambient ceiling glow, no LED strip along the floor, just a faint green glow from the exit sign above a darkened corridor. I reached to close the door, and it obeyed immediately. When I pressed the L button again, it took me to the lobby like nothing happened. I logged the incident. I told myself maybe it was a glitch in the panel, maybe the screen displayed an old floor code, maybe there had been a basement before renovations. I even asked my supervisor the next day, casually, if the elevator had ever been reprogrammed. He looked at me and said, "There's no basement in this building." I dropped it. For a few nights, nothing else happened. I avoided thinking about it. But then the elevator started doing it again. Every few nights, at random intervals, one of the 2 elevators would descend to 1 on its own. I could see it in the surveillance logs. The logs didn't show footage, just floor numbers and timestamps. At first, I thought it was a delay. Maybe someone was manually overriding the controls, but the cameras never showed anyone waiting. I watched the feed live one night, just to be sure. Around 3:08 a.m., elevator B lit up on the monitor. It moved from the 5th floor all the way down to 1. The lobby call panel didn't light up. No one had requested it. It had gone down by itself. I wrote to the service company and asked if this could be a test mode or an engineer's access protocol. They sent back a generic response, something about firmware updates and remote diagnostics. But 2 nights later, when I stepped into elevator A, the same thing happened. I pressed 4. The elevator didn't respond. Then the button lights flickered off, and the panel read 1. I stood there, breathing slowly. When the doors opened, I saw the same dark corridor. No lights, no sound, no signage. Except this time, the motion sensor light above the far door blinked on, just for a second. As if something had moved. I hit the close door button and held it until the elevator sealed shut. The lift didn't move at first. Then, with a slight hum, it returned me to the 4th floor like nothing had happened. After that, I started checking the sensor data logs from the basement level, if you could call it that. I had access to all motion logs in the building, and that's when I noticed the most disturbing thing. There were motion events. In the time-stamped logs, there were consistent motion activations below the lobby level, around the same time every night, between 3 VARs and 3:12 a.m., sometimes 12 seconds, sometimes longer. I reported it to corporate. They ran a diagnostic on the building's motion sensors. They found nothing. I asked for the blueprints. I wanted to see for myself. There was no crawl space, no second shaft, no auxiliary platform, just 6 levels, no mention of subterranean construction. And yet the motion logs continued to update. The elevator continued to go there, and I never set foot on one. The building had 4 internal cameras dedicated to the elevator system, one inside each cab and one pointed at each set of doors on the lobby floor. I started watching them every night after the motion readings wouldn't stop. Around the same time, each shift, between 3 and 3:15 a.m., the elevators would move, uncalled. I caught it happening in real time once and managed to download the footage. That's how I saw the glitch. It was a Thursday night, 3:06 a.m. Elevator B was idle on the lobby floor. No calls on the panel, no foot traffic. I double-checked. The building was empty. Then the doors opened. No one was outside, no one stepped in. And yet, the camera feed inside the elevator glitched. It wasn't just static. It was full blackout for 44 seconds. When the image returned, it wasn't a live feed. It was a freeze frame. A man was standing in the elevator. He was tall, wearing a grey maintenance uniform. No logo, no name badge. He stood perfectly still, with his forehead resting against the side wall, facing away from the camera. His arms were slack, his head tilted slightly to the left. His body was barely illuminated by the interior lights, but the freeze frame didn't change. No movement, no flicker. I checked the playback timestamp. 3:07:13 to 3:07:57. Exact same frame. At 3:07:58, the feed cut to black again. 2 seconds later, it returned to normal. The elevator was empty, no sign of him leaving. The doors never reopened, and the panel above the door read L. It had never moved. I played the footage back 5 times. Then I checked the other cameras. The lobby feed showed the doors opening, then nothing. No one stepped in. But the moment the elevator doors closed, the timestamp jumped ahead. The system skipped ahead exactly 44 seconds. Like those seconds had been overwritten. I isolated the segment and sent it to our tech department. The file corrupted during upload. Only the frame remained. That single, still image. I left it open on my monitor for a long time that night, staring at it, trying to understand what I was looking at. I even printed it out. I still have it, folded in my drawer. I showed it to the day shift manager. He said it looked like someone we used to contract for elevator repairs, a guy named Price, subcontractor from a maintenance group that filed for bankruptcy in 2014. I asked if Price still worked for anyone. He didn't answer. He just said, "That's not possible." It got worse after that. Not dramatically, just subtly. Enough to gnaw at you. Enough to make you question whether you'd ever really known what was real in that building. The elevator started responding to calls no one made. Lights in unoccupied floors flickered on. Once I heard a printer go off in one of the second-floor suites, long after the office had vacated the space. When I returned to the front desk, a printed paper sat alone on the ground. It was blank. The logs became unreliable. Security doors unlocked at odd hours. Sometimes I'd find them propped open with nothing nearby. I started keeping a written journal. I didn't want to rely on digital timestamps anymore. Eventually, I stumbled across an old report from a receptionist who worked the front desk years earlier. It was buried in the building's archival incident logs, back when the property was under different ownership. The report was marked incomplete. The last paragraph ended with a sentence I can't stop thinking about. I went down. I understand now why we forget. There was no further elaboration. Her name was Camille. I tried to find her online. Nothing came up. The day I submitted my resignation, I stayed past the end of my shift. I waited until 3 a.m. Then I stood by the elevator and watched the panel. At 3:06, the down light flicked on. The doors opened. The panel read 1. I didn't step in, but I leaned close enough to listen. There was no sound, not silence exactly, something thinner than silence, like the space inside a locked drawer you haven't opened in years. I stepped back and let the doors close. The elevator descended, then came back up, empty. No logs registered the movement, no camera feeds saved the footage. I left the building before sunrise and never returned. There was never a basement, but I'm not sure that matters anymore. Story 2. Every night the alarm triggered at 3:33, but the footage was always blank. This happened to me in 2021. At the time, I was working nights at a fulfillment warehouse about 20 miles outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't a well-known company, just a third-party logistics firm that handled overflow for larger distributors. We mostly sorted consumer goods, bulk items, and corporate returns. I was a stock control tech, which is just a fancy way of saying I monitored the digital inventory and manually corrected discrepancies between the system and what was actually on the shelves. It was a quiet job. There were 3 of us on the night shift, myself, 1 forklift operator, and a supervisor. The floor was huge, well over 200,000 square feet. A grid of tall racking systems and steel walkways that stretched far enough that it sometimes took 2 or 3 minutes just to walk from one section to another. Each night, I sat in a room above the main warehouse floor, monitoring product logs, thermal sensors, and scanner data. Every bin that moved through the system had a barcode attached, and every scan left a trail. Time, location, item number, and the name of the user logged into the scanner. I didn't notice the pattern at first. The volume of data was too high, but over time I began to see small irregularities in Section 12. Always Section 12. The shelving units there were for electronics, keyboards, monitors, routers. We didn't get many orders in that category during the night, and the bins should have remained static unless there was a return or a reclass. Yet I kept seeing movement. Around 3:30 every night, a cluster of 5 or 6 product bins would change location. The scan logs showed them being removed from one shelf, reclassified, and returned to a different shelf, all within about 2 minutes. Always the same bins, always the same timing, but there was no footage to go with it. Our warehouse had motion-triggered cameras for each section. When I pulled up the logs for Section 12, the video at the relevant time always came back blank. Not black, not glitched, just static frame captures, empty shelves, nothing out of place, as if nothing moved at all. But the scan records were clear. Each transaction was signed with a user ID, R. Callahan. The name didn't match anyone on our current roster. I checked with HR and asked if we had any old employees by that name. They said no, not going back a full 10 years. I brought it up to my supervisor, Greg. He laughed and said the system probably recycled an old ID by mistake. That or the ghost of Callahan still picking orders, he joked. But I wasn't laughing. The logs were consistent every night, same time, same product, same phantom user. I printed the reports and started keeping track manually. For a week straight the pattern held. The system thought someone was working those bins. But no one was assigned to that section, and no one had a scanner with that ID. I tried shadowing the forklift driver one night, casually suggesting we check Section 12 for outdated inventory. He wasn't thrilled, but humored me. At 3:25 a.m., we arrived in the aisle. It was dead quiet, no movement, no lights beyond what we carried. The handheld scanner flickered slightly as we walked. Then, without warning, it beeped. Item E6417, reclass pending. The driver turned to me and asked, "You just scanned that?" I shook my head. The scanner had been clipped to my belt, untouched. A second beep, then a third. We watched as the reclass notifications populated the screen, items being scanned in real time, but no one else was in the aisle. No footsteps, no shadows, no echo of movement, just empty racks stretching in both directions. He told me he was going back to the floor office. I didn't argue. When I got back to my station, I checked the logs again. The scanner ID was the same, R. Callahan, every bin moved. Time stamped at 3:33. By the third week, I'd stopped logging anything else. Section 12 had become the focus of every shift. I adjusted the camera thresholds to trigger on minimal motion, set alerts to ping my terminal if any sensor tripped after 3:30 a.m. I stopped telling my co-workers about it. One night, I stayed an extra 2 hours after my shift ended. I didn't tell anyone I was staying. I parked around back, let myself in through the employee entrance, and walked the length of the warehouse alone. No lights came on. They were all motion triggered. I didn't bring a flashlight. It was 3:29 a.m. when I reached the edge of Section 12. The scanners were quiet, no beeps, no logs, just rows and rows of bins and shelving, the barcode labels flickering in the low glow of the exit signs. I stood at the end of the conveyor system, waiting. At 3:31, I heard something shift, a soft scrape of plastic on steel, then again, closer. I stepped around the shelving and crouched beside the conveyor belt. The conveyor was off, but the belt always made slight creaks from settling. I waited. My heart beat louder than the sounds around me. Then the lights dimmed, only slightly. Not like they were turning off, more like something passed under the motion sensor, just enough to make the LEDs stutter. And then I saw it, just beneath the conveyor. On the far side, a shape, not standing, not walking, crouched. Its head was lowered, neck bent at a harsh angle. Its hands, if that's what they were, rested flat on the concrete floor, fingers splayed. I couldn't see the face. The entire figure was partially hidden by the steel supports, barely lit by the residual glow from a status monitor. But it wasn't moving, just waiting. I didn't breathe. I couldn't tell how long I stayed there. Maybe 15 seconds, maybe a minute. Then a loud click sounded behind me. The main floor light sensor had picked something up, probably my own movement, and in that flash of artificial daylight, the figure beneath the conveyor was gone. I didn't see it move. I didn't hear anything, but it wasn't there anymore. I checked the scanner logs again when I got back upstairs. 3:33 a.m. R. Callahan. Same items, same reclass codes, same barcode numbers. But this time, one extra field had been populated. Handled via manual override internal. I ran a search through the back-end system. Manual overrides required admin access. Only 3 employees had it. Me, Greg, and a systems engineer named Omar. But none of us had been logged in at that time. The system attributed the override to an account labeled Internal User Dowser1. The profile had no creation date, no last login timestamp, just one note in the access logs, in system since deployment. I didn't sleep after that. The next week, I reached out to an old contact from my IT CERT program. I asked him if he'd ever heard of inventory systems retaining phantom user profiles. He told me about a case study they covered in class, non-event anomalies, he called them, a kind of digital residue. The theory was that in high-repetition environments, especially those operating on 24-hour cycles, patterns could become so deeply embedded in the software that the system began to mimic behavior, create ghost data, artifacts of motion, logged without cause, like digital muscle memory. But that wasn't what bothered me. It was what he said next. These anomalies usually don't show up unless someone's watching for them, like the system needs observation to behave that way. It's like looking too closely pulls something out of the noise. I thought about that for a long time. By then, I was working in full isolation. My forklift driver transferred. My supervisor was on leave. I was alone every night. I stopped checking the cameras. I let the bins move. I let the system write its logs, but the more I ignored it, the more it changed. The scan data started including remarks, manual comments in the notes field, meant for auditing purposes, usually blank. Now they weren't. The first note said, "Corrected your error." The second, "This was always mine." The third, "You're not alone up there." All 3 were signed the same way. R. Callahan. I pulled the access records one last time. It showed two concurrent sessions at 3:33 a.m., one from my own terminal, the other from Section 12, both logged in under my name. But the second instance wasn't labeled as an external login. It was marked as internal user since day one. The system didn't recognize a conflict. It thought both were valid. I didn't return to work after that shift. The company sent me a termination notice for job abandonment. They never asked why I left, and I never explained. I don't talk about that warehouse anymore. But sometimes, when I wake up around 3:30 a.m., I swear I can still hear the conveyor hum, and in the silence that follows, the faint sound of plastic scraping steel. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. There were footsteps above me, but we were the top floor. This happened to me in 2020. I was a night shift nurse at a geriatric care center in Massachusetts, an older 5-story facility on the outskirts of town. It had once been a private hospital back in the 1940s, and parts of it still carried that history. Marble tiles in the stairwells, brass fixtures on the elevators, deep window wells and echoing hallways. Our ward, the 5th floor, had been fully converted into a long-term memory care unit. Most of the patients didn't leave their rooms unless accompanied. We had 12 residents total, and I knew each of them by name, habit, and voice. There were only 2 of us on staff at night, me and a rotating RN supervisor who usually stayed on the 2nd floor unless paged. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was alone up there. The first time I heard the footsteps, I thought it was a mistake. It was around 3 a.m. during one of my usual checks. I'd just finished restocking linens and had returned to the nurse's station to finish up charting when I heard it. Soft, deliberate steps above me. Not in the hallway. Overhead. I froze. Looked up at the acoustic tiles, then out the window. There was no above. We were the top floor. Above us was just roof and air. I stepped into the hallway and listened. The sounds were faint but distinct, heel to toe, slowly crossing from one side to the other, then stopping. Nothing else, no creaks, no voices, just silence afterward. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same rhythm, always overhead. By the 3rd night, I brought my phone and recorded it, just to prove I wasn't imagining it. The sound was subtle, so faint you could miss it, but when I played it through headphones, it was unmistakable. A pattern. Not HVAC, not pipes, not random building noise. I played it for 2 co-workers during handoff one morning. One of them dismissed it, said it was probably expansion or settling, but the other, a nurse who'd worked there for over 20 years, went completely still when she heard it. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me. "Is that from your floor?" she asked. "Yeah, it's above me." She looked even more uncomfortable. Then, from behind us, a voice piped up. One of our residents, Mr. Cleary, who was being wheeled to the dining area by a CNA. He listened for a few seconds, then said, "That's Dr. Farrell. He used to walk like that, back when he ran the ward." I asked him what he meant. Mr. Cleary blinked slowly and added, "He had that little limp from the hip surgery. One foot landed a little harder than the other." He smiled faintly, like he was remembering something comforting. Then, without hesitation, he added, "He died in '92. I asked around after that. Most of the newer staff hadn't heard the name, but one of the administrators confirmed that a Dr. Farrell had worked there decades ago. Head of psychiatry, retired in the late 80s. Apparently, he collapsed in his home a few years later and passed away. Alone. His office used to be on the 5th floor, before they turned it into a memory ward. I listened to that recording again later that night, slowed it down, focused on the heavier footfall, the faint drag on every 3rd step, and once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. We had a staff locker closet in the back hallway next to the maintenance hatch, just past room 5113. It was an older section of the building, barely touched during renovations. The closet was supposed to be unused, locked. I only noticed it because the cleaning crew had left their mop bucket near it one night, and when I went to move it, I heard something inside. It wasn't loud, just a soft rattle, like a hanger being brushed against the inside of a door. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. The light inside didn't work, so I used the flashlight app on my phone. It wasn't a large space. A narrow utility locker with a single wire shelf and a few hangers. But there, neatly folded on the shelf, was a nurse's uniform. White, pressed, stiff from age. The name stitched into the breast pocket read, V. Thomas. I froze. My full name is Victoria Thomas, but no one at the facility called me that. I went by Vicky, and I'd never worked on any floor but the 5th, never wore that style of uniform. We used scrubs, light blue or green. That was a dress uniform. Starched. 1970s, maybe earlier. It was the kind of uniform we had framed in the history display by the main entrance. I touched the fabric. It was cold, slightly brittle, smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper. Below it was a pair of folded tights and a nurse's cap. I took the uniform to the nurse manager that morning and asked if it belonged to anyone. She said no. That closet was supposed to be sealed for storage. She looked visibly disturbed when I showed her the name tag. She said there'd never been another nurse named Thomas on staff, not since she'd worked there. We checked the employee registry together. No one, not in the last 30 years. That night, I found the closet locked again. I didn't touch it after that. But sometimes, walking past it, I swear I heard a soft scrape from the other side of the door, like fabric shifting against drywall. After the incident with the uniform, I started digging into the shift records. I had admin access to the digital logs, primarily for overtime approval and chart audits. The logs were time-stamped down to the minute, categorized by floor and task. I noticed something strange. Every third Thursday, between 2 and 4 a.m., there was a completed log entry for medication rounds, floor 5. It was always signed the same way, RN V. Thomas. But I hadn't logged those, not once. The first time I saw it, I assumed it was a duplication error, some glitch in the EMR system. I checked with IT. They ran an audit. No signs of corruption. The entry was valid, logged from a terminal on the 5th floor, but I hadn't used that terminal those nights. I checked the room assignment. It had come from the auxiliary station near room 510. That terminal hadn't even been active since before the upgrade. I went to check it myself the following Thursday, set an alarm, got to the terminal at 1:55 a.m. I sat in silence, listened to the humming of the ventilation and the occasional cough from down the hallway. At 2:07 a.m., the screen flickered on. I didn't touch it. No mouse movement, no keyboard input, but the login screen disappeared, and the medication interface appeared. Fields auto-filled, time-stamped. Entry completed. Signed, RN V. Thomas. Then the screen went black again. I backed away. The sound of footsteps came from the hallway behind me, faint, precise, slower than usual, with a slight limp. I didn't turn around. I stood there, frozen. The sounds reached the threshold of the room, then stopped. When I finally turned, there was nothing there. The hallway was empty, but the scent of antiseptic was stronger than it should have been, almost metallic, almost familiar. I submitted a formal report. HR never responded. But a week later, a small update appeared in the terminal software. The 5th floor logs were no longer accessible to non-administrative staff. I still dream about the closet, and the footsteps, and the name stitched into that uniform, not because it scared me, but because somewhere in that building something is still doing the job, still checking charts, still making rounds, still remembering its purpose, long after everyone else forgot.